The morning light filtered through the crystal dome of the Galactic Council chambers, casting rainbow patterns across the polished floors. Ambassador Thren adjusted her ceremonial robes and checked her presentation notes one final time. Today would mark the greatest achievement in galactic history. For 300 years, civilizations across the galaxy had lived in fear of the void entities. These mysterious creatures appeared without warning, phasing through solid matter and devouring entire star systems before vanishing back into whatever dimension they called home. No weapon could touch them. No shield could stop them. Until now. The council chamber filled with representatives from 12 of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations. The Alterans with their flowing tentacles and pearl-like skin. The crystalline Vex whose bodies sparkled like living diamonds. The towering Saurians with their scaled hides and ancient wisdom. Each species had contributed their greatest scientific minds to solve the void entity problem. Honored delegates, Thren began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic systems. We gather today to witness the culmination of centuries of cooperation and scientific advancement. The quantum reality anchor is complete. A holographic display materialized above the central platform, showing a massive orbital station bristling with exotic technology. The device looked like a mechanical flower, with dozens of energy collectors pointed toward a central core that pulsed with contained power. High Counselor Vryn stepped forward, her crystalline form refracting the light into brilliant patterns. The mathematics are perfect. Our greatest AI systems have run every calculation 1,000,000 times over. The probability engines of the Kethmaran give us a success rate of 99.97%. Murmurs of approval rippled through the assembled delegates. The collective's hive mind representatives nodded in unison. The energy-based luminals pulsed with excitement. Even the normally skeptical Saurians seemed pleased. The principle is elegant in its simplicity, continued Thren. The void entities phase between dimensions by manipulating quantum fluctuations in spacetime. Our reality anchor will lock these fluctuations in place, trapping the entities in our dimension where conventional weapons can destroy them. The presentation continued with detailed technical specifications, energy requirements, dimensional mathematics, quantum field manipulation theories that would make lesser minds weep with their beauty. Every aspect had been calculated, refined, and perfected. Then a hand went up in the back of the chamber. Tom Baker, Earth's representative to the Galactic Council, looked somewhat out of place among the exotic alien delegates. His simple gray suit and unremarkable human features seemed almost primitive compared to the advanced beings around him. He had been quietly taking notes throughout the presentation. Yes, Representative Baker. Thren acknowledged him with barely concealed impatience. Humans were new to galactic politics, having only achieved faster-than-light travel 50 years ago. Their contributions to the project had been minimal. This all sounds very impressive, Tom said, standing up slowly. The engineering is incredible. The science is beyond anything we humans could dream of creating. Just one small question, if you don't mind. Of course, Thren replied, though her tentacles twitched with mild annoyance. Tom smiled and asked in his casual, friendly manner, what could go wrong? The chamber fell silent. Not the respectful quiet of deep thought, but the complete stillness of shock. Every delegate froze in place. The collective's drones stopped their constant subtle movements. The luminals dimmed noticeably. Even the air circulation system seemed to pause. Tom looked around, confused by the sudden reaction. I mean, it's a reasonable question, right? We're dealing with forces that can manipulate the fundamental structure of reality. Surely we should consider what might happen if something goes sideways. Ambassador Thren's tentacles began to quiver uncontrollably. Her pearl-like skin shifted from its normal pale blue to a sickly green color. What do you mean by go wrong? Well, you know. Failure modes. Unintended consequences. Murphy's Law. Tom gestured helpfully. Like, what happens if the reality anchor works too well? What if it locks down quantum fluctuations beyond the target area? What if the void entities adapt faster than we expected? High Counselor Vrin's crystalline body flickered like a broken light. Her voice came out as a strangled whisper. We calculated the success parameters. We optimized for maximum efficiency. Right. But what about the stuff that could go wrong? Tom pressed on, oblivious to the growing panic around him. I mean, back on Earth we have this saying. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong. It's just good engineering practice to think through the failure scenarios. The Saurian, Delegate Elder Corks, swayed on his feet. His ancient voice cracked as he spoke. In all my 400 years of life, across all the civilizations I have studied, no one has ever asked such a question about a completed project. Really? That's weird. Tom scratched his head. We ask it about everything back home. When we built our first space elevator, we spent more time figuring out how it could fail than how to make it work. Same with our fusion reactors, our AI systems, our FTL drives. The chamber erupted in chaos. Delegates began shouting in dozens of languages. Emergency communications were sent to homeworlds across the galaxy. The carefully orchestrated presentation dissolved into panic. Dr. Webb, Tom's technical advisor, leaned over and whispered, "I think you broke them." "I just asked a simple question," Tom whispered back. "How did they build something this complex without doing risk assessment?" Ambassador Thren stumbled forward, her tentacles flailing wildly. "Risk assessment? What is risk assessment?" Tom stared at her in amazement. "You don't know what risk assessment is. How do you design anything? How do you make decisions? How do you sleep at night?" "We calculate optimal outcomes," Thren said weakly. "We design for success. We have never considered failure." "Oh no," Tom said, the full implications hitting him. "Oh no. You mean you've never thought about what happens if this thing malfunctions? What if it creates a cascading failure? What if it accidentally opens a bigger doorway for the void entities?" The panic in the chamber reached new heights. Several delegates fainted. Others began frantically making emergency calls. The collective's drones started spinning in confused circles. High Counselor Vrin managed to restore some semblance of order by dimming the chamber lights and activating the emergency calm field generators. "We must reconvene immediately. The Quantum Reality Anchor project is hereby suspended pending further analysis." As the delegates filed out in various states of distress, Tom turned to Dr. Webb. "Did I just accidentally save the galaxy or doom it?" "Probably both," Webb replied. "Welcome to the wonderful world of human pessimism." Outside the chamber, emergency meetings were already being called across 12 star systems. The galaxy's greatest minds were about to discover what humans had known for millennia. The most important question in any endeavor was not, how do we make it work, but what happens when it doesn't? The emergency sirens wailed across the Alteran homeworld as their greatest scientists worked through the night. Professor Zenth had not slept in 48 hours. Her tentacles cramped from constantly manipulating holographic equations that had seemed perfect just days ago. Now every calculation looked like a potential disaster waiting to happen. "Computer run scenario analysis 7012, she commanded, her voice hoarse from exhaustion. The AI's response was immediate and terrifying. Scenario 7212 shows a 34.7% probability of quantum cascade failure if reality anchor operates at 97% efficiency or higher. Estimated damage, complete loss of FTL capability within a 50 light-year radius. Zenth collapsed into her chair. Across the laboratory, her colleagues were discovering similar horrors. What had seemed like minor variables in their equations were actually critical points of failure. Their perfect weapon could potentially cripple galactic civilization. On the collective homeworld, billions of interconnected minds buzzed with activity. The hive mind had never experienced anything like this before. For the first time in their species history, they were considering failure as a deliberate intellectual exercise rather than just observing it when it happened. Node Prime, the central consciousness that coordinated their thoughts, struggled to process the concept. "We must understand this human thinking pattern. How do they function while constantly anticipating disaster? The response came from millions of individual minds. It appears they call it healthy paranoia and consider it a survival trait. Meanwhile, on Vex Prime, High Counselor Vryn flickered between different crystalline forms as stress overwhelmed her natural stability. She had called together the Council of Science, their species' most brilliant thinkers, to address the crisis. "How did we miss this?" she asked for the 100th time. "We are the masters of dimensional physics. Our civilization has existed for 10,000 years. Elder scientist Kryn pulsed with dim light. We optimized for success. We never considered that success itself might be dangerous." The emergency council session reconvened within 72 hours of Tom's question. This time, the chamber was packed with additional delegates, scientists, and what the galactic community had never needed before, disaster specialists hastily recruited from various fields. Tom walked into the chamber to find hundreds of alien beings staring at him with mixtures of fear, fascination, and barely contained panic. He carried a simple briefcase and looked remarkably calm for someone who had accidentally triggered a galaxy-wide crisis. "Representative Baker," Ambassador Thren said, her voice shaking slightly. "Our scientists have been reviewing the project based on your question. And?" Tom asked, settling into his seat. "We have identified 17,432 potential failure modes." Tom nodded approvingly. "That's a good start. Did you rank them by probability and severity?" The chamber erupted in confused chatter. Counselor Vryn stepped forward. "Rank them? There are 17,000 potential disasters. How does one rank such things?" "Oh, that's easy," Tom said, opening his briefcase and pulling out a thick manual. "We use a standard risk assessment matrix. You plot probability against impact and focus on the high probability, high impact scenarios first." Dr. Webb appeared on the holographic display, connecting from Earth. "Sorry I'm late. I was putting together a disaster planning team. We've got Murphy's Law specialists, failure mode engineers, and our best pessimists standing by to help." "Pessimists?" Elder Corks asked. "You have professional pessimists?" "Of course, they're incredibly valuable. They spend their whole lives imagining how things can go wrong. We call them Red Team Analysts." Tom flipped through his manual. "Look, this isn't actually that complicated. You just need to start thinking like humans." "Think like humans," Thren repeated slowly, as if the words were a foreign concept. "Right. Every time you design something, ask yourself, how can this kill me? How can this fail catastrophically? How can this succeed so well that it becomes a problem?" Tom counted on his fingers. "Those are the big three questions," Dr. Webb nodded from the hologram. "We've been doing risk assessment since we were cave people. You don't survive as a species without constantly wondering what's going to try to eat you next." The alien delegates exchanged glances. The Saurians, as the oldest species present, were the first to understand. "You mean, this constant anticipation of failure is why your species survived long enough to achieve space travel?" "Exactly," Tom said. "Natural selection favored the paranoid. The humans who thought that rustling bush probably doesn't contain a predator got eaten. The ones who thought that rustling bush definitely contains something that wants to kill me lived long enough to have children." Counselor Vryn flickered thoughtfully. "So this thinking pattern is literally built into your survival instincts." "Yep, we can't help it. Show us a perfectly good plan and our first instinct is to figure out how it's going to explode in our faces." Tom grinned. "It's kept us alive so far." The emergency session continued for 18 hours as human representatives walked the alien delegates through basic risk assessment principles. They introduced concepts that were completely foreign to advanced galactic civilization: redundancy planning, fail-safes, contingency protocols, and the revolutionary idea of building things that could break safely. "You mean you deliberately design components to fail?" Professor Zenth asked, her tentacles quivering with the intellectual strain of the concept. "Sure," Dr. Webb replied. "If something has to break, we make sure it breaks in a way that doesn't take everything else with it. We call them sacrificial components. And you test these failures? Node Prime's collective voice echoed through the chamber. All the time. We break things on purpose to see what happens. We call it stress testing. Sometimes we even hire people whose job is to try to break our systems. Tom pulled up a presentation. We call them penetration testers or red team analysts. The concept of deliberately causing failure to prevent worse failure was so alien to the galactic community that several delegates required medical attention. The luminals dimmed to nearly invisible levels as they tried to process the idea. The collective's nodes started arguing among themselves for the first time in recorded history. As the session wound down, Ambassador Thren asked the question that was on everyone's mind. What do we do now? The void entities could attack at any time and our weapon is too dangerous to use. Tom smiled. Now we fix it. We redesign the reality anchor with proper safety protocols. We add kill switches, fail-safes, and emergency shutdown procedures. We build it to fail gracefully instead of catastrophically. And how long will this take? Counselor Vreen asked. However long it takes to do it right, Tom replied. Because the only thing worse than not having a weapon against the void entities is having a weapon that accidentally destroys the galaxy when we use it. As the delegates filed out, many were overheard muttering variations of the same phrase. How do humans sleep at night thinking like this? The answer, had they asked, was simple. Humans slept well precisely because they spent their days preparing for the things that kept everyone else awake. The smell of coffee filled the small conference room aboard Earth's orbital research station as the hastily assembled team of scientists, engineers, and what the media had dubbed professional worriers reviewed the quantum reality anchor specifications. Dr. Emma Rodriguez took another sip from her mug, which bore the motto, "Murphy was an optimist," and shook her head at the alien schematics. "This is beautiful work," she said to her colleague, Dr. James Park, who was frantically scribbling notes in the margins of the technical documents. "The mathematics are elegant, the engineering is incredible, and it's absolutely terrifying." "How terrifying are we talking?" asked Lisa Chen, the team's risk assessment specialist. She was known throughout the scientific community for her ability to find disaster scenarios in apparently safe systems. Emma pulled up a holographic display showing the reality anchor's operational parameters. "Well, let's start with the obvious one. They're planning to lock down quantum fluctuations across a massive area of space, but they never asked what happens to quantum-based technologies during the lockdown." "Like FTL drives," James said, looking up from his calculations. "Like FTL drives. Like energy-based life forms. Like artificial gravity generators. Like the collective's quantum-entangled hive mind." Emma highlighted each system on the display. "If this thing works as designed, it could strand every ship in local space and accidentally commit genocide against 3 different species." Lisa whistled low. "That's just the first-order effects. What about cascade failures?" Emma's expression grew darker. "I'm glad you asked. Computer, run scenario model Delta 7. The holographic display shifted to show a terrifying simulation. As the reality anchor activated, the quantum lockdown spread beyond its intended boundaries, creating a wave of space-time rigidity that propagated outward at nearly the speed of light. The quantum field equations suggest a 12% chance of creating a permanent dead zone where nothing more complex than basic chemistry can function," Emma explained. "Congratulations, you've just sterilized 3 star systems to solve a problem in one." Dr. Park looked sick. "Please tell me there's more." "Oh, there's more." Emma switched to another simulation. "Best case scenario, the device works exactly as intended and traps the void entities in normal space. But here's the question nobody asked. What if the void entities are only the scouts?" The room fell silent except for the hum of the station's life support systems. "Think about it," Emma continued. "These creatures can phase between dimensions at will. They've been probing our reality for centuries, but they've never committed to a full-scale invasion. What if they've been testing our defenses? What if trapping their advanced scouts in our dimension triggers a response from whatever's sending them?" Lisa pulled up her own set of calculations. "I've been running probability models based on human military doctrine. If an enemy traps your reconnaissance units, the standard response is to send overwhelming force to extract them. So we could be accidentally declaring war on a trans-dimensional civilization that we know nothing about, James said slowly. Gets better, Emma said with dark humor. Analysis of the void entity's behavior patterns suggests they're highly intelligent and possibly hive-minded. Trap them in our reality, and they might just decide to share everything they've learned about galactic civilization with their friends back home. The team worked in grim silence for several more hours, each new analysis revealing additional, catastrophic possibilities. The reality anchor could work too well, not work well enough, or work perfectly and still doom galactic civilization through unintended consequences. When Tom Baker arrived for the briefing, he found his scientific team looking like they'd been through a war. "How bad is it?" he asked, settling into a chair. "Scale of 1 to 10? Emma asked. "This is about a 15. Tom nodded calmly. "Okay, let's hear it." The briefing took 3 hours. With each new failure scenario, Tom's expression grew more serious, but he didn't seem surprised. When Emma finished explaining the 47th way the reality anchor could accidentally end civilization, he leaned back and sighed. "Right. So we're dealing with a doomsday weapon disguised as a defensive system, designed by civilizations that have never heard of Murphy's Law." "That's actually a pretty accurate summary," James admitted. "The scary part," Lisa added, "is that this kind of thinking seems to be universal among advanced alien civilizations. They optimize for success, but never plan for failure." Tom stood up and walked to the viewing port, looking out at the stars, where dozens of alien civilizations were probably having similar revelations about their own technologies. "You know what this reminds me of?" he said finally. "The Challenger disaster." The room grew quiet. Every engineer and scientist knew the story. Brilliant people, incredible technology, meticulous planning, Tom continued. But they optimized for success and ignored the warnings about failure modes. One rubber ring failed in cold weather and 7 people died because someone decided the risk was acceptable. Emma nodded grimly. "Except this time, we're talking about risking entire star systems." "So what do we do?" James asked. "The galactic community is looking to us for answers." Tom turned back to the team. "We do what humans do best. We assume everything will go wrong, and we plan for it." Over the next several days, Earth's team produced what became known as the Human Report, a comprehensive analysis of the Reality Anchor project from a failure-first perspective. The document was 500 pages long and identified 1,147 distinct failure modes ranging from minor operational hiccups to galaxy-ending catastrophes, but more importantly, it included something the alien designers had never considered: solutions. "The good news," Emma explained to the reconvened Galactic Council, "is that most of these problems are solvable if you plan for them from the beginning." She activated a holographic display showing a redesigned reality anchor, now bristling with additional systems. Kill switches at every level, from individual components up to the entire array. Quantum dampeners to prevent cascade failures. Progressive activation protocols that test each stage before proceeding. Emergency broadcast systems to warn ships in the area. And most importantly, a dead man's switch that automatically shuts down the entire system if it loses contact with the control station. Ambassador Thren's tentacles twitched nervously. But all these safety systems, they increase the complexity exponentially. The chance of component failure goes up dramatically, Tom agreed. That's why we also design the safety systems to fail safely. If a kill switch breaks, it defaults to off. If a warning system fails, it defaults to maximum alert. The whole system is designed around the assumption that something will break. Counselor Vryn flickered with what might have been admiration. "You plan for your plans to fail." "We plan for our backup plans to fail," Lisa corrected. "And then we make backup plans for the backup plans." Elder Corks leaned forward, his ancient eyes bright with curiosity. "How do you function as a society with this level of paranoia?" Tom smiled. "We call it cautious optimism. We hope for the best, prepare for the worst, and usually end up somewhere in between. It's kept our species alive for 200,000 years. As the council session ended, delegates from across the galaxy began the long process of learning to think like humans. It was, many of them realized, going to change everything about how they approach technology, exploration, and life itself. The age of galactic optimism was ending. The age of prepared pessimism had begun. 6 months later, the construction zones around the reality anchor looked like a completely different project. What had once been an elegant, streamlined weapon now resembled a mechanical porcupine, bristling with sensors, backup systems, kill switches, and emergency protocols. Every surface was covered with warning labels in 47 galactic languages, including the newly added human phrase, "If this light is blinking, evacuate immediately." Chief Engineer Taki Nakamura floated in her maintenance suit outside the primary control hub, running her final inspection before the weapons test. As Earth's lead representative on the redesign project, she had spent the last half-year teaching alien engineers concepts they had never encountered: redundancy, graceful failure, and the art of building things that broke safely. Control, this is Nakamura. System check on backup power coupling 7 Alpha, she spoke into her comm unit. Copy that, Chief, came the reply from the orbital command station. Running diagnostic now. Below her, the massive reality anchor stretched across several kilometers of space. Where the original design had been sleek and purposeful, the human redesigned version was pragmatic and paranoid. Every critical system had been tripled. Every power coupling had an emergency shutoff. Every sensor array had backups for its backups. "You humans build very ugly machines," commented Zix, her Alteran counterpart, as he floated nearby, checking his own systems. "Ugly machines that don't accidentally end civilization," Taki replied cheerfully. "I'll take function over form any day." Inside the command station, the atmosphere was tense. Representatives from 12 species monitored thousands of displays showing every conceivable parameter of the reality anchor's operation. The collective had assigned 50,000 individual minds to watch for anomalies. The Kethmaran had their most sophisticated probability engines running continuous failure analysis. And in the center of it all sat Tom Baker, looking remarkably relaxed for someone about to test a weapon that had originally been designed to accidentally destroy the galaxy. "All stations report ready," announced Commander Vex, the Alteran officer in charge of the test. "Human safety team, final status check." Dr. Rodriguez consulted her panel, which was covered in more red warning lights than a Christmas tree. "All emergency systems are green. All kill switches are armed and ready. All evacuation routes are clear. Auto shutdown systems are active." She looked up with a grin. "We are as ready as paranoid planning can make us. Collective hive mind reports full integration with safety protocols," added the insectoid representative. "We have assigned independent oversight nodes to monitor for groupthink bias in our analysis." This was another human innovation that had horrified the aliens. The idea that their own thinking might be flawed and need external oversight. The concept of deliberately introducing contrarian viewpoints into decision-making had required therapy for several species. "Probability engines show optimal conditions for controlled testing," reported the Kethmaran delegate. "Failure cascade scenarios are within acceptable parameters." Tom nodded approvingly. 6 months of human influence had taught the galaxy's most advanced species to actually define what acceptable parameters meant, instead of just assuming everything would work perfectly. "All right, everyone," Tom announced. "Let's remember the plan. We start with minimum power, run for exactly 30 seconds, then shut down for full analysis. No heroics, no pushing the limits, no, let's see what happens if we try this." "The human approach," Counselor Vryn observed from her position at the diplomatic observation station. "Assume disaster and prevent it." The test began with almost anticlimactic simplicity. The reality anchor powered up to exactly 1.2% of its design capacity and activated for 30 seconds. Across the testing area, space-time became slightly more rigid. Quantum fluctuation slowed down. And, most importantly, nothing exploded. "Test complete," announced Commander Vex. "All systems showing normal parameters." But instead of celebrating, The human team immediately began their analysis protocol. Every sensor reading was compared to predicted values. Every system was checked for signs of stress or unexpected behavior. The 30-second test generated 4 hours of analysis. Minor variance in quantum field density at grid reference 479, reported Lisa Chen, within normal parameters but flagging for monitoring. Backup power coupling on sensor array 12 showed a 0.003% voltage drop during activation, added Dr. Park. Probably normal, but I want to check the connections. The alien delegates watched in fascination as the humans treated a successful test like a potential disaster waiting to happen. This was how they approached everything. Success was just failure that hadn't revealed itself yet. 3 weeks and 17 incremental tests later, the reality anchor was finally ready for full power operation. But by then, long-range sensors had detected something that made everyone nervous. Void entity signatures approaching the test system. Perfect timing, Tom muttered, reviewing the threat assessment. They're showing up just as we're ready to test the weapon designed to stop them. The void entities arrived in typical fashion. Reality simply twisted and they were there. 12 massive creatures that looked like living shadows with too many dimensions, each one capable of phasing through matter at will. They moved through space like sharks through water, heading directly for the inhabited worlds of the test system. All stations, battle alert, Commander Vex announced. This is not a drill. Activating reality anchor at full power. But instead of the smooth activation the original designers had envisioned, the human-modified system went through its safety checklist. Emergency broadcasts warned all ships in the area. Progressive power systems activated in sequence. Hundreds of sensors monitored every aspect of the field generation process. Field strength at 20% and rising, reported Dr. Rodriguez. All safety systems nominal. Quantum lockdown field expanding as predicted, added the collective representative. No cascade effects detected. Void entities are maintaining course, observed the tactical officer. They don't seem to be aware of the field yet. At 50% power, the first void entity hit the quantum lockdown field and suddenly became solid. The creature writhed in apparent confusion as it found itself unable to phase out of normal space. Its companions quickly followed, all of them trapped in reality, where conventional weapons could actually hurt them. It's working, breathed Ambassador Thren. They're solid. They're vulnerable. The battle was brief but decisive. Galactic fleet forces, prepared with human-designed contingency plans, engaged the trapped void entities with conventional weapons. Without their ability to phase between dimensions, the creatures were powerful but not invincible. Within an hour, all 12 void entities had been destroyed. Test successful, Commander Vex announced. Reality anchor performed within all safety parameters. No cascade failures, no unintended consequences detected. But as the celebration began, Tom was already studying the sensor readings with a frown. What's wrong? Dr. Rodriguez asked, noticing his expression. These void entities, Tom said, highlighting the tactical data. They came straight here, right to our test system, right when we were ready to test the weapon. Coincidence? Suggested. Commander Vex, humans don't believe in coincidences, Tom replied. We believe in Murphy's Law, and Murphy says that if something seems too convenient, it's probably a trap. Dr. Park looked up from his analysis station. Tom, you need to see this. The void entity's approach vector doesn't match random exploration patterns. They came here deliberately. Like they knew we were here, Lisa added grimly. Like they knew we were testing an anti-void weapon. The celebration in the command center died as the implication sank in. The void entities hadn't stumbled across their test by accident. They had been drawn there. But by what? And more importantly, what else might be coming? All stations, maintain alert status, Tom announced. If these were scouts, we might have bigger problems heading our way. Outside the command station, space remained calm and peaceful. But somewhere in the depths of trans-dimensional space, something vast and ancient had noticed that its advanced scouts had failed to report back. The real test was just beginning. 5 years after the Void Entity Crisis, the Galactic Academy on Nexus Station had become something completely unprecedented in galactic history, a school dedicated to teaching failure. Students from across the galaxy came to learn what humans called Murphy's Law studies, the science of assuming everything would go wrong and planning accordingly. Professor Lisa Chen walked into her packed lecture hall, carrying a coffee mug that read, "Disaster Preparedness Expert," and looking out at 200 eager alien faces. Her students included young Alterans, crystalline Vex offspring, juvenile collective drones, and representatives from species that had joined the galactic community specifically to learn human-style risk assessment. "Good morning, class," she began, setting her mug on the lectern. "Who can tell me the first law of human engineering?" A young Saurian raised her clawed hand. "If it can break, it will break, Professor." "Excellent. And the second law?" An Alteran student's tentacles wiggled enthusiastically. "If it cannot break, it will break anyway in a way you didn't expect." "Perfect. Today we're going to study the Kepler 9 incident, also known as the day the backup plan needed a backup plan. The holographic display showed a mining operation that had gone catastrophically wrong when their main systems failed, their backup systems failed, and their emergency protocols accidentally made everything worse. It was exactly the kind of cascade failure that pre-human galactic civilization would never have survived. "The key lesson here," Lisa continued, "is that the mining team had learned to think like humans. When their primary plan failed, they didn't panic. When their backup plan also failed, they adapted. And when their emergency evacuation turned into a complete disaster, they improvised a solution using cargo containers and mining explosives." "How did they know what to do?" asked a collective drone, its hive mind struggling with the concept of individual improvisation. "They had trained for failure," Lisa explained. "Human-style disaster preparation includes something we call tabletop exercises. We imagine disasters and practice responding to them. But more importantly, we teach people to expect their plans to fail and to think creatively when they do." Across the station, similar lessons were being taught in dozens of subjects. Engineering students learned to build redundant safety systems. Military cadets studied human tactical doctrine, which assumed every plan would survive exactly 5 minutes of contact with the enemy. Even diplomatic corps were learning human negotiation techniques based on the assumption that everyone was lying about something. In the station's central plaza, Tom Baker sat at a small cafe, reviewing reports from across the galaxy. As the Director of Galactic Risk Assessment, a job title that hadn't existed 6 years ago, he received daily updates on how human thinking was changing galactic civilization. The reports were remarkable. Species that had never experienced a major technological disaster were now routinely discovering critical flaws in their designs before building them. The collective had prevented 17 different hive mind cascade failures by implementing human-style independent oversight protocols. Even the ancient Saurians had started asking what could go wrong before making major decisions. "Mind if I join you?" asked a familiar voice. Tom looked up to see Counselor Vryn approaching, her crystalline form sparkling in the station's artificial sunlight. Over the years, she had become one of the most enthusiastic converts to human-style thinking, much to the horror of her more traditional colleagues. "Of course," Tom said, gesturing to the empty chair. "How are the disaster preparedness protocols working out on Vex Prime?" Vryn's form flickered with what he had learned to recognize as amusement. "We discovered that our primary power grid had 47 single points of failure that could have plunged our entire civilization into darkness. We are currently rebuilding everything with proper redundancy." "How are your people handling it?" Tom asked, knowing that admitting imperfection was psychologically difficult for most advanced species, better than expected. The younger generation especially has embraced what they call constructive pessimism. They compete to find flaws in each other's designs. Vryn paused, her light pattern shifting to something resembling embarrassment. "Though I must admit, some have taken it too far. We had to establish guidelines after a group of students proved that our capital city could theoretically be destroyed by a sufficiently determined individual with access to the municipal water system. Tom nearly choked on his coffee. They what? Nothing dangerous was actually attempted, Vryn assured him quickly. It was purely theoretical, but it did prompt us to review our infrastructure security protocols. Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent chiming from Tom's communication device. He frowned as he read the message, then looked up with the expression that everyone had learned to fear, a human who had just thought of something that could go wrong. What is it? Vryn asked, her form dimming with concern. Long-range sensors have detected something unusual approaching from beyond the galactic rim, Tom said, standing up quickly. Something that doesn't match any known physics. They hurried to the station's central command center, where a crowd of scientists and officials were already gathering around the main display. The image showed a massive structure moving through space at impossible speeds, its geometry seemingly shifting and changing as they watched. Preliminary analysis suggests it's approximately the size of a small moon, reported Dr. Park, who had become the station's chief threat assessment officer. But the energy signatures don't match anything in our databases. Could it be related to the void entities? Asked Ambassador Thren, her tentacles twitching with nervous energy. Unknown, Dr. Park replied. But given our new protocols, we're already implementing First Contact Disaster Preparedness Plan Alpha. Tom smiled with pride. 6 years ago, no one would have thought to prepare for the possibility that first contact with a new species could go catastrophically wrong. Now it was standard procedure. All right, people, Tom announced to the assembled crowd. Let's start with our basic questions. What do we know? What don't we know? And most importantly, what could go wrong? The crowd answered in unison. It had become something of a ritual. Over the next several hours, the approaching object was analyzed from every possible angle. The human-trained scientists didn't just study what it was doing. They imagined every possible thing it could do, every way first contact could fail, and every unintended consequence of their own responses. Scenario analysis complete, reported Lisa Chen, who had been called in from her classes. We've identified 43 ways this could end badly, from accidental war declaration to inadvertent cultural contamination. And our response protocols? Tom asked. Full defensive preparation without appearing hostile, communication attempts using mathematical constants, emergency evacuation plans for all border systems, and a very big red button that implements total communication blackout if things go sideways. The approaching object turned out to be exactly what human pessimism had prepared for, something completely unexpected. It was a mobile research station belonging to a species of sentient mathematical equations that lived in the space between dimensions. They had come to investigate reports of interesting paradoxes in local space-time, the quantum disturbances caused by the reality anchor tests. The beings were fascinated by the concept of physical matter that could think, while the galactic community was amazed to discover life forms made of pure mathematics. It could have been a disaster of misunderstanding and incompatible physics. Instead, the galaxy's new human-influenced protocols handled it smoothly. First Contact Disaster Preparedness Plan Alpha has been successfully completed, announced Commander Vex 6 weeks later. No wars declared, no civilizations accidentally destroyed, no paradoxes created that would unravel reality. The mathematical entities had been welcomed into the galactic community and were already contributing their unique perspective to disaster planning. Beings made of living equations, it turned out, were excellent at spotting logical inconsistencies in safety protocols. As the celebration wound down, Tom stood at the command center's main viewport, looking out at the stars where dozens of civilizations were slowly learning to expect the unexpected. Penny for your thoughts? Asked Dr. Rodriguez, joining him at the window. Just thinking about how far we've come, Tom replied. 6 years ago, I asked one simple question and accidentally triggered a galaxy-wide panic attack. Now look at us. And now? Emma asked. Tom smiled. Now, when something completely impossible shows up at our doorstep, we're ready for it. We've taught the galaxy to think like humans, to plan for failure, expect the unexpected, and always have a backup plan for the backup plan. So what's next? Emma asked. Tom's expression grew thoughtful. Well, we've handled void entities from other dimensions and mathematical life forms from between realities. We've prevented 17 major technological disasters and stopped 3 accidental wars. We've taught the galaxy to prepare for the impossible. He paused, looking out at the vast expanse of space. I suppose the next logical question is, what haven't we thought of yet? Emma laughed. Now you're thinking like a human. The question is, Tom said with a grin, is the galaxy ready for what happens when we find out? Somewhere in the deep void between galaxies, something ancient and vast noticed the sudden appearance of organized, prepared resistance in what had once been a chaotic and vulnerable region of space. It began to take interest in these strange new patterns of thought that had emerged among the younger species. But this time, the galaxy was ready. After all, they had learned the most important lesson humanity could teach. The most dangerous. Words in any language were, what could possibly go wrong? And the most powerful response was to have a detailed plan for when it inevitably did. The human way had become the galactic way. Expect the worst, prepare for everything, and never ever assume that because something hadn't gone wrong yet, it never would. Because somewhere out there, Murphy's Law was waiting, and the only way to survive it was to see it coming first.